Gary Speed was a football legend, always smiling, always winning. But what if I told you behind that smile, he always wanted disapper? One day, the world woke up, but Gary didn't, and that's when everyone saw the worst suicide in football history. Let's uncover. On September 8, 1969, Gary Speed was born to Roger and Carl Speed, both belonging to Chester. He grew up in Aston Park, Queensferry, where he attended school. Coming from a working-class family that loved football, it was obvious that Gary liked football, much like the rest of his friends. Gary had latent potential that would break free later in his life, but who knew what price it would come at? It was evident that Gary wasn't like the rest of the kids. After moving to Hawarden High School, Gary played for the under-13, under-14 and under-15 teams. From time to time, he also enjoyed a bit of cricket. It's also hilarious how comedic family rivalries ran deep, as Gary would choose to support Everton while his father supported Liverpool just for the extra chuckles. I mean, we've all been there, right? Anyway, at the age of 15, Gary was granted the opportunity to join the Leeds United youth system, and that's where he showed football managers that he was a needle in a haystack, an unpolished gem with untapped potential. Gary blazed through the professional ranks on 13th June 1988, and it was almost time for his big debut. Gary played for Leeds United on 6th May 1989 with a 0-0 draw. Nothing spectacular, but Gary was happy with his performance. Due to his dedication and hard work, Gary was given a regular place at Leeds United and promptly secured promotion to First Division. Gary was happy to play football professionally, but had set his eyes on Everton and Everton alone. It was 19th of May 1990 when Gary won the first of 3 under-21 caps against Poland in his journey with Wales at Penydarren Park. Gary won his first senior cap the very next day as a 75th-minute substitute while facing off against Costa Rica at Cardiff. Gary Speed was on a speedy roll. That marked the beginning of Gary's incredible journey as one of the most prolific football players the world had ever laid their eyes on. But something in his eyes was always missing. No one could read between the lines, because Gary was a master at hiding his feelings. Now Gary Speed also managed to score that unbelievable penalty, defeating Romania in the 1994 World Qualifier Cup at Cardiff Arms Park. Under his spectacular leadership, Wales managed to make it to the playoffs for the 2004 European Championships. Unfortunately, Wales lost to Russia by a single goal at the Millennium Stadium. Gary was always on the playing field. He rarely missed a match. Whether it was competitive or friendly, South America, Africa or Europe, Gary also got a chance to play for his dream team, Everton, for a whopping £3.5 million contract. Gary was repositioned from the left wing to a central midfield position. This was a good idea. Gary was pumped. He managed to score his first and only hat-trick. Everton beat Southampton 7-1 thanks to Gary in November 1996. Gary played 58 league games for Everton. Newcastle United piqued his interest with a £5.5 million contract, cementing him as the most expensive Welsh football player in history. But why did Gary leave Everton? Well, a conflict that remains a mystery, as Gary never revealed the details of leaving his dream team. That was the peak of Gary's career. Newcastle United faced 2 FA Cup final defeats, along with a defeat in UEFA's Champions League. Around his 35th birthday, he left to play for the Bolton Wanderers for £750,000 in July 2004. Gary felt he'd lived to be 100 years during the prime of his football career, but when the match was over, he longed for eternal slumber. Gary was battling demons along the way. His magnanimous career came to an end on 13 October 2004 after making a total of 85 appearances. Gary was the team captain and held the football field in his clutches 44 times from 1997 to 2004. He scored 7 goals. By December 2006, Gary became the first player in the world to play in 500 English Premier games. Gary still had his head in football. He played for Sheffield United for £250,000 and continued to play till November 2008. To his name, Gary amassed 677 league appearances, 104 goals and 125 cup matches with 31 goals. Including 85 international appearances, Gary totalled a staggering 887 senior matches. And from here, there was no going back. In such a short period, Gary had seen everything football had to offer. He went from rags to riches and got to play for his favourite team. To top it all off, Gary was promoted to manager of Sheffield United on December 14th, 2010. Gary was a decent football manager. Sheffield managed 5 wins and 5 defeats, raising their position from 117th to 45th on the FIFA World Rankings. Things were going pretty well for Gary, too good, until one day the entire world was shocked. On November 27th, 2011, Gary made an appearance on Football Focus on BBC television. Gary was in fine form that day, as stated by the presenter Dan Walker. The programme lasted till 1 p.m. Speed chatted about various topics and looked back on the good old days, watching clips with old Newcastle teammate Alan Shearer. Speed spent a decent time at Old Trafford, across the Manchester Ship Canal. Then he went home at 5 p.m. Pretty normal for Gary Speed. The next morning, just before the clock struck 7 a.m., Gary was found unresponsive at his home. His wife, Louise, promptly phoned the police and ambulance service. It was never determined by the coroner whether Gary Speed's death was incidental or intentional. The police and medical staff did not consider his death suspicious. Gary's death was declared as a tragedy. His death was finally announced to the world by the Football Association of Wales a few hours later. The night before, Louise and Gary had an argument. Arguments were normal between them. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't anything that could push him over the edge. But under such circumstances, Louise couldn't help but blame herself. How did this happen? Why could this happen? The football world was in shock. There wasn't a shred of indication that the level-headed Gary Speed was depressed and could have committed suicide. At the age of 42, Gary Speed left behind a wife and 2 sons. But there seems to be more to the story than meets the eye. His wife Louise, who had regular arguments with Gary, revealed that he had been deeply stressed 4 days before his death. Louise probably thought Gary was having a meltdown due to stress. After all, they had a habit of fighting on and off, a wife and a husband, the games we play, right? Well, the clues were always there. 7 years after Gary Speed's death, Louise figured her grieving days were over, but as she was going through her older letters, she found something that shed light on his feelings. It was a letter addressed to Louise when Gary was studying at Hawarden High School at the age of 17. All the pieces fell into place. Dear Louise, I don't really know what to say. I have been thinking about finishing at Leeds. I've also been thinking of other things, which I won't say. I'm feeling really down. I'm just going to go to sleep now and hope I feel better when I wake up. I love you so much. I will always love you. I don't know what else to say except you might see me sooner than you think, or otherwise. You never leave my mind. Nothing else seems to matter anymore. I love you more than you can imagine. Gary. It became evident that Gary had been struggling with his emotions for a very long time and had refused to share his feelings openly. Behind the mask of that generous and humble football player was a lot of turmoil and pain. Yet Gary hid his problems. Whether it was out of sheer embarrassment or not to become a burden on his loved ones, Gary bottled things up. Keeping emotions bottled up isn't the way to cope with them. From his teenage years, Gary had been carrying a lot of emotional weight. Football was just a distraction. His achievements didn't bring him the joy they should have. His lavish lifestyle didn't make him happy. Gary was dealing with deep sadness. He tried his hardest to keep his emotions to himself, but he couldn't handle the pain anymore. On November 11th, 2011, Gary Speed, a renowned football player and coach, left the world. Gary was one of the first football players who integrated sports science and his knowledge of cryotherapy, analysis, stretching and nutrition into football. This helped him prolong his football career, which remained relatively injury-free, and he dispensed this wealth of knowledge to his football players as a coach of Sheffield and Wales. Gary treated Wales to hand-picked nutritionists, masseurs, sports psychologists and analysts to ensure that his team was in prime condition to play at all times. It was Gary's implementation of sports science that Wales managed to win the UEFA European Champion, Euro 2016. Sadly, Gary couldn't live to see it with his own eyes. Gary Speed was an excellent football player, a man of humility who declared ample time for his supporters and well-wishers. Everybody was a friend. Many played with him, many watched him from the stands, and many saw him on the television. Yet he managed to radiate the aura of his incredible plays and warm spirit to all football fans. That was Gary Speed, a great man and a great football player. Gary's death was a tragic loss. Many games were held in his honour and paved the way for sports science, nutrition, and advanced cryotherapy to be incorporated into football team recovery regimes. Send some prayers for Gary in the comments below